Hi, my name is Doug Piirto. I'm retired Professor Emeritus from the Natural Resources Management and Environmental Sciences Department at CalPoly State University. I've worked there for 30 years, and prior to that, I spent 10 wonderful years for the USDA Forest Service. I certainly grew up with some health challenges that my folks had to help me learn how to conquer and move forward in life with. And I owe a lot of my success in life due to the fact that I have a wonderful family, my mother and my father, my sister, and now my wife. And we're all faced with challenges, but you have to step up to them and meet them. They affect your confidence, and they affect how other people treat you, and they can leave lasting effects in terms of how you speak or how others perceive your speaking patterns, and you have to learn how to deal with that. And I suppose that was probably one of the biggest challenges I had as a young person, is finding myself and finding the confidence within myself to move forward despite those challenges. I was diagnosed with epilepsy, and the convulsions came on when I was 6 years old, and they lasted until I was almost 18. Fortunately, through medication and the way I managed to grow and develop, I've grown past all of that. But those things affect your confidence and your ability to how people perceive you and how you perceive yourself and how your parents treat you. And it makes you different. And you've got to figure out how to handle that and how to move forward in life despite those challenges and try to find your future. Well, baseball comes to mind. And the sports activities that I did as I was growing up, I was never any Mickey Mantle or any of the Roger Maris, bless their hearts, or the major players of the time, but certainly as any young boy and a young person moving up, trying to discover my future, I suppose sports had a major impact on me, striving to do as good as you could do with the skills and abilities that you're given, and realizing that you can get better if you practice. I suppose that's a major activity that my coaches helped me with as I was developing as a younger person. Other people in my life, aside from forestry, that had a major impact on me, certainly my mom and dad and my parents, my sister, and certainly my wife now. I've said that already, but I think I don't want to forget my grandmother, and she gave me a card for Easter or for graduation. I still have that card, and it said in there that you need to take the time to show service and love for one another here and now, because tomorrow may not be for any one of us, and the time to act and the time to show compassion and love and the time to provide service is now. And I've never forgotten that, and I've tried to live my life by that. My father was a Navy man, and when he got out of the Navy, he loved to be outdoors, and he always took me along with him. And I think that's where my love for the woods originated from. I know we used to go up to Lake Tahoe a lot, and I can also remember my father taking me fishing up to Pyramid Lake, which is north of Reno, a trophy fishing lake for cutthroat trout. And my love for forestry it came from those outdoor trips with my dad to various locations around Reno and in the Sierra Nevadas there. I just loved being in the woods and those Sierra Nevadas, and I think that's what led me to establishing a forestry career at the University of Nevada and then on to Colorado State and finally at Berkeley. I worked on Short Ranch, which is in the southern part of Reno. And the Short family was well known, and my father knew the family, and they offered me a job, and I was largely doing hauling hay and helping harvest hay during the summers, and doing various duties, ranch duties as assigned. I didn't even know how to drive a car at the time, and they put me on a tractor and said, hey. And so I had a lot of things to learn very quickly, and I felt that was a very enriching experience, and I always look back with it at that time with a lot of fondness. Well, I went to Reno High School, and Mr. Simonian was the biology teacher there, and it was fascinating taking his classes. And I suppose that got me thinking about what it might be like to establish a profession in some aspect of biology. And when I got up to the University of Nevada at Reno, which was really the only school I could afford to go to at the time, and my parents lived there, I thought I was going to go off and become an attorney and a lawyer. And I went up there, and they said it's in the College of Liberal Arts, and it just seemed not quite right. It didn't seem to fit. And I heard about the College of Agriculture, and I'd worked on a ranch for several seasons during the summer, and I loved that ranch work and the outdoors. And so they said there's a College of Agriculture at UNR. So I went over and saw Dr. Serfeli. He was the associate dean, and he said, Doug, maybe you might be interested in natural resources management. We've got a forestry component of that might be of interest to you. And 30 seconds later, I was over in Dr. Scott's office in the Renewable Natural Resources Department at the University of Nevada at Reno, and that's how my forestry career started. Well, my education started at the University of Nevada at Reno, and Dr. Serfeli, the associate dean, got me started, and I, to this day, really thank him because he got me thinking about what was right for me. He led me over to Dr. Scott. Dr. Scott is well known. He was a University of Michigan grad. I believe that's where he got his Ph.D., and he was at Nevada, Reno, and so he kind of was my first major mentor in forestry and natural resources. And he saw something in me that I didn't realize I had, and he says, you might be okay to go to grad school. And so he supported me in that effort. He was one of my major references. And I applied to Colorado State University, and that's where I got my master's. And so if you're asking me about other people that had major impacts on my life at Colorado State, I walked into Dr. Wangard's office, who was a Yaley from Yale University, professor there, and then he came to Colorado State. And the first class he put me in was calculus, and oh my gosh, what a challenge that was. And but I proved myself at Colorado State, got my master's, and I studied under Dr. Troxel and Dr. Frank Hawksworth, Don Cruz, and succeeded in that effort in 1971, and they wrote letters of reference for me, and I landed up at Berkeley, the University of California, Berkeley, where I worked on my Ph.D. at the UC Forest Products Lab. And I earned my Ph.D. there in 1977. Dr. Fred Dickinson, Dr. Wayne Wilcox, Dr. John Parmenter, Dr. Dave Wood, John Helms, Bill Libby, Rudy Graw, Henry Vox, John Zivnuska were all part of that education that I received while I was at Berkeley. They helped me with my confidence, and they helped me try to chart a path to my future in relationship to what I could do with the skills and abilities that Doug Piirto has. $10 million people around me in a cosmopolitan area, and where are my Sierra Nevadas? Because they're not in Berkeley. And the social challenges. I've always liked to think of myself as a person that embraced all cultures and tried to be fair and respectful of all people around me. And so being at Berkeley was the right match in that context, but it was overwhelming being in that metropolitan area with so many people and being alone with so many people around you. And I had to learn how to face that because it was so different from the University of Nevada and Colorado State University. But I had wonderful teaching experiences because I had faculty like John Parmenter, Dave Wood, total differences in terms of the political spectrum each man represented. Very conservative in one context, very liberal in the other, yet both men had the highest level of respect for one another. And that rubbed off on me. We would sit down at lunchtime and play hearts and talk about different issues of the time. And I began to realize it doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, that we all bleed red and we got to learn how to work together. And Berkeley taught me that. I guess another thing that I remember was John Parmenter, Dr. Parmenter. We were out in the woods and he would say, "Doug, what do you see?" And I would go off on all these technical details of describing the forest, and he would say, "Doug, what do you see?" And I would look around and I'd try to find more technical details that I'd missed. And finally he said, "Doug, what do you see?" Finally, it began to dawn on me what he was really trying to get me to visualize is the fact that this forest is a menagerie or a mosaic of many different parts, spatially different and changing over time. And that was the answer he was really trying to seek. And there's an ecology at work, and that we have to think about both the spatial context of the forest and the temporal context of the forest, because what we see today will be different when we come back to this area tomorrow, a month, a year from now, 50 years from now, or however far in the future you want to go. I've always remembered that. And when I teach, all these years I've been teaching, I've always emphasized the spatial and temporal aspects to get my students to realize that you have to ask the question, how did this forest get to be what we're seeing here? What prior events affect this forest structure that we see today? What was that past condition? What is that present condition? And how do we manage for some desired future condition in relationship to our human needs and human objectives for this forest? Wood science and technology. My bachelor's was in forestry and natural resources from Nevada, Reno. My master's was in forest and wood science, and I always had an interest in the wood quality, how trees grow and develop, and the factors that influence trees and develop, and how they express themselves in the quality of the wood that is produced in those trees. So my master's work at Colorado State was focused on the effects of dwarf mistletoe on the wood properties of lodgepole pine. And then when I landed up at UC Berkeley, I continued those studies and focused on coast redwood and then later on giant sequoia. I mean, it can't get any better than that. I came to California and look what we got. We got the oldest trees in the world, the bristlecone pines. We got the largest trees in the world, the giant sequoias, and we have the tallest trees in the world, our coast redwoods. And that was one of the things that brought me to California, was that opportunity to study. I got to tell you, I was up to here with university. I mean, I loved my teachers. Don't misunderstand me. I love my teachers. I loved university. I loved the academic life. There's no place like UC Berkeley in terms of going into the main library and being in that upper chamber there, in that paper chase kind of auditorium with wood benches everywhere, and it just seems like the learning environment is just so substantial. And having a cup of coffee up at the International House, looking out across to the Golden Gate Bridge, what a setting. And I will never forget that. And even though it was such a challenge, I'm a Go Bears fan through and through. I had all these credentials, and it didn't seem right. It didn't seem like enough. As I went into forestry, yet I was greener than the trees in relationship to managing the forest. And I had 2 university job offers, one at University of Massachusetts in extension forestry, and another at Michigan Tech in the area of forest health. A major industry in the Illinois area that does high-end wood products, wanted someone in the area of wood quality, research and development, and then the Forest Service. 4 job offers. And I had been wanting, since I got my bachelor's degree, to go to work for the Forest Service. I worked 2 wonderful seasons with them on the Plumas National Forest and the Wainema National Forest. And here is the Forest Service. When I get my doctorate, it seems like they were paying attention. I don't know how it happened, but there's a letter. I had applied, and I had gotten on more lists than the CIA maintains in terms of trying to get hired by, especially as I was finishing up my doctoral work. I did get on government lists to try to get employed. And there's a letter in my mailbox with the other job offers. And I decided I'm going to go to work for the Forest Service. You can imagine what my father said. What do they teach you there at Berkeley? Why are you going to work out in the woods to be a timber beast when you could have gone to work for 2 major universities or a major company? And I said to my father, I need the experience in the woods, Dad, and I need to learn how to be a practicing forester if I'm ever going to teach anybody about forestry. And I said, you got to give me the opportunity, and I'm going to take the opportunity to work for the Forest Service. And it was one of the best things I've ever done. I became a timber management officer, certified silviculturalist, and I worked for them for approximately 10 years. And then after that, they've invited me to do various other projects for them. So that's quite different. And I was out in the woods with people like Woody Coates and Robert Wirtz and Walter Watkins, and laying out timber sails and crawling on my stomach through brush fields that I couldn't even see through. And all of that taught me about the challenges of forestry and the benefits of forestry if you do your job correctly. And that's where I got my nickname, Dr. Doug, because Walter Watkins almost from day one started referring to me, okay, Dr. Doug, let's go to work here. Bless his heart, he's passed away, but he was a wonderful man. Well, I was in charge of, I initially started out as a timber sale reconnaissance forester, and I moved over to a sale prep forester, and that was on the Kings River Ranger District. And then they moved me into sale administration for a period of time, and I had to live with the mistakes I made in sale preparation, and I had to correct the mistakes. So there was no better learning experience than that. Laying out timber sales and then turning around and having to administer the timber sales with the logger to get the job done. And so that's an experience that I think almost every forester should get. It's not only the preparation, but the administration of the timber sale to make sure it comes out the way it's supposed to come out. Well, I was almost immediately given supervisory roles, and ultimately I became a timber management officer. So there are personnel management, human resources issues that develop from time to time that take significant fortitude and significant thought and paper documentation in order to properly process. But I've always been people-oriented to begin with, and I always tried this before any kind of disciplinary action needed to take place. I always tried to just sit down eyeball to eyeball with people and say, look, these are the issues, these are the kinds of things we got to work with. You don't get that doing a research study. So I suppose that was one of the key lessons is in working with the Forest Services. I worked with a lot of very good people. And occasionally I would have a challenging person that I would have to attend to the issues of the day and focus on that and work my way through that issue with that person so that we could get the job done correctly and that we both felt fulfilled in the work that we were doing. My office was the forest, and I have this wonderful little cartoon that I like to put up which shows a professor opening the door, and there's the forest. That I went out into that every day. And you can't help but learn from that. And working with wonderful people to help me get my job done. And there's been a lot of them, John Fisk, and I shouldn't even attempt to try to start saying Bob Heald, Mark Smith, Bruce Moyle, Dick Stauber, the forest supervisor, Art Gaffrey. I mean, it's just hundreds of wonderful people that I worked with to help achieve the mission of the Forest Service in those days. I've mentioned Bob Heald and some people that weren't associated with the Forest Service, but they did provide training for Forest Service employees. And so that's how I got associated with Bob, in the sense that I went through the silvicultural certification program, and Bob played a key role in the instruction for that program. Other duties as assigned included everything from, when I was working for the Forest Service, from attending to recreationists, working on vegetation management plans for campgrounds, to all the timber sale work, to developing a vegetation management plan for Sierra Summit that was implemented, to firefighting duties when the fire bell rang. And I went through all that training as well to get to a crew boss level, and also situation status. I did a little bit of work in fire camp when the fire bell rang. So either I was on the line as a crew boss, or I was in fire camp working in situation status and in plans. And that would never have happened had I gone to work immediately for a university. And so my experience in the Forest Service was varied. Even though I was in the timber shop, I did a lot of different kinds of duties, working with recreation and fire, and then forest land management, and then resource management. Two things come to mind. The sale administration, watching your project develop. That was amazing. And to have a role to play working with the logger to make sure it came out the way you wanted it to come out. And I suppose the other thing is going back to areas you wrote silvicultural prescriptions on and seeing them 30 years later, like Sierra Summit, like my shelter woods on the back of Northeast Patterson Mountain, and other areas, and seeing how they're developing now. And they say forestry is an art and a science. Remember that when I said earlier about spatial and temporal considerations? When you come back to your work 20, 30, 40 years later and actually see it, that's very fulfilling, especially when it comes out right. Yeah, that's what I teach my students, that desired future condition. And it's not a static condition. It's an evolving condition that you may want to start out with 680 trees per acre when you plant, which is actually too dense to begin with. But you've got to move that down to something less than 100 as it moves towards an older condition, an intermediate and more mature condition. So depending on the forest type and the site quality. And so you got to understand that forestry is this movement of trees and numbers of trees through time. I've taught there for 30 years. Actually, in the first 2 years, I was a Forest Service employee from 85 and 87. Through 87, they sent me there. It's been a really fulfilling experience because I could relate to my students to things that I was learning when I was working for the Forest Service. And I've had well over 300 classes that I've taught in that 30-year period. I've lost track, hundreds of classes, let's put it that way. And I do know the number is exceeding 10,000 students that have been in those classes over that time. And that's a pretty significant, I'm trying to find the right word. When you look back on it, you begin to realize, holy cats, I've been around a lot of people. And I had a role to play in helping those young people discover their future and find their future. And that's very fulfilling. And I've always been people-centered and student-centered, and I always wanted to do the best for my students that I could. Not that I'm the sharpest tack around or the sharpest person around, but I never give up on trying to understand things. And I didn't want my students to give up. I wanted them to continue to strive to learn and apply that knowledge to specific situations. Oh my gosh, I would do a disservice to the 10,000 plus students by naming one or two, but they've gone on to amazing careers. There are students in various aspects of fire management for city and local, county, state, and federal agencies working in fire and fuels management. There are students that are working in various aspects of timber management across the state. There are graduates from my program that have gone into recreation-oriented kinds of jobs, and there have been many more that have gone into environmental management kinds of jobs. And many of them have gone on to very prestigious positions, on to be professors at West Point, to corporate executive officers for major forest products companies here in California, and so forth. So I'm very proud of them. The faculty at CalPoly, and maybe I had a little role to play, but we worked hard to try to produce a student that was going to be effective as they move their careers forward, not only for themselves, but for the people of California and for our forests. Swanton Pacific Ranch is CalPoly's school forest. And I don't even know where to begin on that. There's a lot of intertwining issues related to when you bring up Swanton Pacific Ranch to me. I was hired at CalPoly to teach a forestry, to help manage a forestry program. And at that time, CalPoly wasn't an accredited school. And I said, I graduated from the University of Nevada, and it was not an accredited school either. And not accredited by the Society of American Foresters. And that put me at a little bit of a disadvantage as I was initially trying to get jobs. And I was also challenged and thought of as being different because of that University of Nevada degree. Nothing wrong with the University of Nevada's education, but it was not an accredited forestry program, and that bothered me. It bothered me big time. And you don't get the 4 years of credit towards your license. You only get 2 years of credit if you don't come from an accredited program. And so when they hired me at CalPoly, I said, look, even though I got a master's from Colorado State in an accredited program and my Ph.D. from Berkeley, obviously it's accredited, CalPoly needs to become accredited too if you're going to offer a forestry program. Otherwise, I don't want to teach here. I'll go back to work in the Forest Service. And so the faculty and I worked really, really hard to get CalPoly's program fully accredited, and a part of that was not only did we have to have the right number of faculty, but we also had to have a school forest. And Al Smith was a graduate of CalPoly in crop science. He went on to become the mayor of Los Gatos. He taught in vocational agriculture at Campbell High School. He was supposed to report for military duty in his young life, and he fell off the train because he loved railroading so much. He lost his leg, so he couldn't go in the military. Ultimately, he went to CalPoly, got his degree, became mayor of Los Gatos, became a school teacher, became very wealthy. And as he got older, he opted to seek out ways to give his property beyond when he died. And he sought CalPoly. And of course, we saw an opportunity here. We saw the opportunity to have a place for our students to learn by doing. And Norm Pillsbury, my boss, department head of the department at that time, asked me to be involved with his forest projects coordinator, and I was involved with that almost the entire 30 years that I was at CalPoly. And I sat down with Al Smith and I asked Al, what are your dreams for Swanton Pacific, and how do you want to see CalPoly working here in relationship to this forest? and these lands, these wildland and agricultural lands. And he says, I want students learning how to manage these lands and to appreciate the kinds of things that you've been talking about, the spatial and temporal considerations and hands-on learning. And so, boy, Al Smith and I had more than one beer together and a lot of great times. I was also getting recertified by the Forest Service. You remember, my Forest Service career really never ended when I left them in 1987, because they kept involving me in various projects. And that meant that I had to maintain my certification as a silviculturalist. And so they put me through a re-examination. And I said, well, let's do it on the uneven age forest management work I'm doing at Swanton Pacific Ranch. And Frank Birch and the various folks that were working for the Forest Service said, that'll work. And so we were out looking at Stand E, a cable unit, and evaluating my silvicultural prescription and my logging plan for that unit. And I came back at the end of the day, and Al Smith left a little note on my truck on the windshield. I still have that note. And it said, Doug, I know you've done a good job. Don't sweat it. After you're done today, I'd like you to join me at the Hilltop Hilton, and we'll uncork a cold one. The Hilltop Hilton was his home that oversaw the Pacific Ocean. So when you talk to me about Swanton Pacific, I remember Al Smith, and I remember the legacy of Al Smith in relationship to giving CalPoly the opportunity to have a place where our students can learn about forestry, environmental management, natural resources management. We've implemented uneven age forest management consistent with the forest practice rules for that central coast area of California. And we've been monitoring that work. I have a paper coming out, a couple papers focused on that. So Swanton Pacific Ranch is very dear to my heart, and we've had literally thousands of students up there and various field trips, seeing various aspects of that management. Well, one of the interesting aspects of CalPoly's school forest that came to us from Al Smith was the fact that we're the only school forest, in my mind, that has its own railroad system. It came from the Pacific Exposition in, I believe, 1918 in San Francisco, and it came as a result of Al and his purchase of those engines and cars and the track that he wanted to put on Swanton Pacific Ranch when he was the owner of that property. And so there's several miles of track, there's a railroad station, and reconstructed and retrofitted engines and cars that all work. And on New Year's Eve, that whole system comes alive, and people celebrate New Year's Eve with a train ride and uncorking bottles of champagne. To when Al's birthday is celebrated, we have a major event to commemorate that, and we have a day called CalPoly Day as well. So 3 major events, the railroad is operating, but at other times of the year, the railroad is also operating. And that was because Al Smith loved the railroad. He worked for the railroads when he was a student at CalPoly, and he lost his leg working for the railroad, which changed his whole career direction, but he never lost his love for railroading and his hobbies associated with the railroad. Al Smith used to like to take me over to the Mexican restaurant there in Santa Cruz, and we would have a few margaritas in the process. And the next day I had to teach, and I had somewhere between 50 and 100 students around me. Some of them were Forest Service folks that were taking a special training program, and some of them were my undergraduate students from CalPoly. And oh my God, I those margaritas from the day before just didn't settle too well with my system nor with my head. I did a good job of teaching, but health-wise, I had to make a quick beeline out into the woods. 100 people trying to find a place where I could take care of business. And fortunately, none of that was too embarrassing, but at the end of the day, I told Al Smith about it. It took him 2 days to stop laughing. That's one of the funnier stories I remember, because Al was for a gazillionaire, for all the things that man accomplished, he was so real. And my working relationship with Al Smith was just something I'll never forget. I have other stories, like, not quite as bizarre as that one, but Swanton Pacific is a very good place. I'm still trying to get that paper published. It turned out really well. It's just publishing papers is a long process. But that was a study that was started by Martin and Gasser, both faculty members at UC Berkeley. And then there was an RFP put out by Cal Fire, and I responded to it, and because they wanted that area remeasured. And that was, 20 plus years ago. And I've had 3 graduate students working on that study since. Actually, 2 graduate students. Gary Roller and did the first study where we remeasured those thinning plots, and then later Josh Soderlund. And we've got a manuscript ready. We've just got to get that submitted, revised, and resubmitted. It was looking at second growth stands of Giant Sequoia that developed after various events that took place over the last couple, certainly 100 years. And these second growth stands were thinned and had different types of field treatments done to those thinning stands. And the study was focused on how did those second growth Giant Sequoia stands respond to thinning and to the various field treatments that were done in relationship to that management. I've been opportunistic with reference to the research work that I did. I tried to stay focused on Giant Sequoia and Coast Redwood because that's what I was focused on at UC Berkeley when I was there getting my Ph.D. But at the same time, as an RFP came out, request for proposals from one entity or another, I would decide whether or not it was of interest to me, and oftentimes I would submit to see if I would be fortunate enough to get that particular project, and in many cases I did. The pitch canker study in Monterey pines, that was a major, and still is a major cause of concern for how we're going to manage our native stands of Monterey pine into the future. That's an example of some of the research, and I've got 3 papers published on that so far, and I got a 4th coming along. The Giant Sequoia research work has kept me busy all my career, and I was involved on the science board appointed by President Clinton and later by President Bush, or whichever way. But anyway, both presidents appointed me and reappointed me to that science board to focus on how to best manage Giant Sequoia groves in the monument areas. And prior to that, I was asked to do some work on developing an ecological foundation for how we think management should be based. And so I published some papers on that. And I suppose if you ask me what I think was my most effective work, I'm going to have to say that's for others to judge. But maybe that developing an ecological foundation for management of national forests, Giant Sequoia groves, might have been one of my better works. Oh boy, talk about controversy. Even to this day. There are folks in the world that want to draw a line around things and say you can't manage. Just leave it alone. and let nature take its course, which has its place, certainly in wildernesses, certainly some giant sequoias giant sequoia grows that's possible. But there are other situations where humans have had major impacts on forests, and the Sequoia National Forest has been one of those areas where the National Forest Management Act, the Resources Planning Act, all directed the Forest Service to intensively manage some of those lands outside of the giant sequoia groves that were within that commercial land base that the Forest Service was managing at the time. And the issue to me was for the less than, I think it's 100,000 acres of giant sequoia groves, they were trying to withdraw almost 400,000, 300 plus thousand, maybe closer to 400,000 acres. And just say no management will occur here. And the argument I had with that was, okay, I can understand special management areas for each of the giant sequoia groves. I've been advocating that since I started working for the Forest Service. If you look on both Nelder Grove and McKinley Grove management plans, I indicated that we have to have special management zones around each of the groves. But what was bothersome to me was that there were commercially managed areas, all done consistent with the federal laws at the time, way outside of these giant sequoia groves, that were being pulled into this massive monument that didn't make sense to me. And then it didn't make sense to me that we can't manage these. Areas that needed to be thinned, areas that needed brush control or other types of forest management activities were now off limits because we needed to not manage those for the benefit of the giant sequoias, and they were totally unrelated in my mind. And so there was controversy. And I was asked to get in the middle of all that. And initially I objected to the whole monument idea. I even wrote to President Clinton, and I testified on public hearings, and spoke out, trying to use science to the best of my ability to support the recommendations I was making. People were even saying to me, Doug, you shouldn't speak out so much. This is probably going to happen, and you won't get asked to be involved with the Sequoia National Monument later on when we need you. And I said, I got to speak out now. I got to speak my heart in relationship to how I understand the situation. Whatever happens months from now, years from now, happens. Well, it so happened that after the monument was formed, President Clinton and President Bush both, because there was a transition between the two of them, appointed and then reappointed me to the science board that was overseeing the Sequoia National Monument. I always had this worry that really the monument was just an initial step to another national park. And I was very concerned about the impact on the forest products industry and our ability to be able to manage that southern Nevada area and down into the southern California area if we don't have a viable forest products industry. And that's always bothered me. Still bothers me. You got to have a viable forest products industry in order to be able to fully manage forests given the different kinds of situations that develop. I mean, I could go on here with reference to the Sequoia National Monument, but I represent a certain point of view with reference to the issues of the Sequoia National Monument. And there were others that were totally contrary to that, both on the science board and, of course, with reference to the various public constituencies. It worked out such that we developed finally a court-supported EIS. It took two major efforts, more than one science review team, but now we have an EIS and a management plan that's providing some oversight to how the monument is being managed. I was involved to some extent in all of that effort. I tell my students that each of us is a leader and each of us is a manager, and they're showing leadership and management right here and now as I sit in the various classes that they're taking, and they all look at me with a blank stare saying, what do you mean by that? I'm not a corporate executive officer. I'm not an agency official. I tell my students, look, many of you have been faced with very difficult situations. And maybe you were in an emergency situation and you had to change the plan from what you had planned to something that responds to the changing events of that particular incident. That's leadership. And then you had to manage the various activities that took place with reference to that emergency event. So leadership is making the right decisions, and management is implementing those decisions and understanding the distinction between the two. And you can't separate the two, but yet at the same time, it takes someone to make definitive decisions, but those decisions can't be made without good input from the various people that are working with you. And so it's a collaborative effort. And the Board of Forestry gave me an opportunity to become a leader. And what a wonderful opportunity that was. The phone rang, and that's an evolving situation. You don't know if you're going to become a member of the Board of Forestry. The phone may ring, and they might say, would you submit the paperwork to move this nomination process forward? And it takes several months. It starts in the governor's office with reference to the initial nomination, and it has to go before the California legislature. And during all of that, agency officials have to speak up on whether or not they support you or not. And so there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes that I'm not even privy to, but I know they were happening. And a lot of people don't make it to the Board of Forestry. They may get nominated, but they don't make it through that process. So I sit here, it was a distinct honor to be able to serve on the board, to even know that I could get through that political process and make it to the Board of Forestry. I did. Holy cats, I did. And I show up at the boardroom, and Stan Dixon and George Gentry, we were called George Gentry YG, and said, Doug, we're making you the chair of the Forest Management Committee. I said, say what? I can't even find the resources building, let alone the Forest Management Committee room. Yeah, you're going to be the chair of that committee. And I'm brand new to the board. Oh, what a wonderful experience. And it must have been the Lord above. But I said there was a lot of rancor on that particular committee over the years, and I walked in and I said, look, as long as we treat each other with respect, I don't care what your political viewpoint is, I expect that we have a level of decorum and respect for one another. And it's okay to disagree. And once in a while, it's okay to let the voices get a little bit loud here. But when I see that there's no disrespect, we're taking a break. When there's significant disrespect, then we're taking a break. And we're going to figure this out. That's one thing I did say. And I also said we're going to live by the agenda. And we're going to go over the agenda at the beginning of the meeting, make adjustments, and then we're going to live by the agenda, and we're going to get done when we say we're going to get done. And wow, that's almost 4 years in that capacity. We got quite a bit done. And it was because those people, various people, were working together to try to find the common ground. And it was days that, it wasn't easy. But one of the things that really stands out is there was a rule change with reference to how we were treating overstocked forests and whether or not to cut larger, older trees to help pay for some of the costs and allowing landowners to do that. I can't remember exactly the rule changes that we wanted to make and what we called that at the time, but I do know there was a lot of rancor about an argument about that. So that I backtracked a little bit with the group, and I said to the group, well, wait a minute, why don't we first identify the criteria in relationship to what it is that we're trying to do here? How do we want to manage the forest, and what do we want to see of that forest? Before we describe how we want to deal with the actual methods. What is it that we're trying to achieve? And one of the things that was most surprising to me was that both the very liberal versus the very conservative side all came to one major conclusion, and that is that no one wanted to see these forests subdivided. They wanted to see these forests maintained as working, healthy forests. And once we got that out in front of us, some of the rule changes became a whole lot easier to decide upon. We had some criteria that we were evaluating against, and oh my gosh. I mean, I could go on and on here. The Board of Forestry gave me an opportunity to work with people to bring about change. At the time, in anadromous fisheries, salmon, and protection on those streams that had steelhead and the various salmon species in them were of significant concern to both the Cal Fire and to the governor's office and to the various resource management agencies. We were working with Fish and Game in particular. I would say that was a major achievement. That and some of what we did with reference to non-industrial timber management plans and some of the things with reference to how we were approaching thinning and making a difference with reference to reducing the risk of a catastrophic fire in overly stocked stands and enabling landowners to somehow make a difference over a large enough area to reduce those fire risks. And that work is continuing after I've left the board. There's some really good work that's taken place after that. My father, bless his heart, he always got a little self-conscious about me saying this about him, but he was a Navy man, a sailor on the USS Bunker Hill. That was the ship that was attacked by the kamikazes in the Battle of Okinawa, and I've always respected my father for the service that he gave for our country. And I always used to brag about my dad. Maybe not so much when I was younger, but as I got older, I appreciated what he did and putting his life on the line and on the battles he fought in relationship to all of that. And as I grew up with my dad, when I turned 18, one of the major pivotal moments of my life, earlier you asked me what brought me into forestry, and of course it was being out with my dad many times, but we were sitting on the porch enjoying, if you've ever been in Nevada, we have some wonderful weather there, and it was a nice day and sunny day, and we were sitting on the porch, and I was talking to Dad like we did so many hundreds of times, and Dad says, well, Doug, you're at a point where you need to think about what comes next, and what do you think your options are? And of course we talked about that, and it seemed like I had three. One is obviously I could stay at home. Well, actually four. I guess I could just stay at home. Two would be I could go on to college. Three, I could go out and get a job. Or four, I could try to go into the military service. And even though my dad and my two uncles distinguished themselves in military service, my father, because of what I reported earlier, the health challenges I had, always discouraged me from that. He was worried about his son, and he'd rather see me move on to college and academic achievement rather than be in the middle of Vietnam. But he said, the decision's yours, Doug. And so I had 3 or 4 options in front of me, and he says, you could always move out. That might be another option. All of a sudden at 18, I'm faced with decisions that I didn't have to face before 18. And my dad was showing significant leadership there. He was helping his son, as a work supervisor would help an employee, begin to sort through options and to try to come up with criteria to evaluate those options against in relationship to your skills and abilities, the circumstances of the time. That's what leadership's all about, is working together to get to some desired future condition, and helping working with others to get there. And my dad showed major leadership. He gave me the opportunity to make the final decision, but he helped me lay it out in terms of what I needed to be considering. Obviously, I went up to the University of Nevada within a week of that discussion, and went on to become, obviously, the person that I am today. So parental leadership was extremely important in how you interact with your children and how you create circumstances to allow them to grow and to develop and to discover their future. I tell my students, that's one example. I tell my students about what it's like to be a leader as a student and taking yourself. You can't manage yourself if you can't lead yourself. How in the world are you ever going to be able to lead others? And I also tell my students that as you develop and as you move forward in time, people will see in you a capacity to manage, and they'll see in you a capacity to lead. And some of us are better managers than we are leaders, and others of us are better leaders than managers. And then there's some combination of skills and abilities in other folks. But we all lead, and we all manage our lives as we get to the future. And that's what this paper's about. I talked about those different things in my life that affected me. And then I translated that into some principles that I thought might be important for an aspiring student as they think about how they're going to move to their future and how they're going to become leaders and managers. It's easy to talk about it, but it's another thing to do it. And I was trying to make it real with reference to the paper I wrote. And as you know, I go to Finland a lot. My grandparents came from Finland. I was asked to teach at Seinäjoki University. I also did some research with the Finnish Institute of Forestry, Dr. Sauli Valkonen, which is what led it to all this, on pitch canker. I told you about pitch canker earlier. And then later, Seinäjoki University came to my door at the University, CalPoly, and said, we'd like you to be involved with us in developing an exchange program. Seinäjoki University is 15 miles away from where my grandparents were born and raised in Finland. And so I've been back a dozen or more times to Finland since my mom died in 97, since 1998. And one of the things they've asked me in the last 5 years to do was to write a paper and to report on that paper to their classes on leadership and management as I've experienced it. I'm no corporate executive officer, but I've had some experiences in my life where I've had to lead myself to the future, to manage the activities associated with that leadership, and work with others to get to a desired future situation. And that's what I try to teach in this whole process. I try to make it real, and that we all, and each of us, can make a difference in relationship to how we approach life. You gotta like the woods, and you gotta like the outdoors. But that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be out in the woods all the time. But a career in forestry and natural resources involves a love for the outdoors, and it involves a love for trees and the forests and the resources that go with them. So I would want the student to go in it with their eyes open about that aspect of it. But I also say that a forestry and natural resources management education is a great education to launch your career in any number of directions, whether it be in the fire and fuels management area, the recreation management area, the forest management area. Some of our graduates have gone on to become business managers of various types of businesses and or in the forest products industry, but also peripheral industries like real estate. And so the education that you receive in forestry and natural resources is a good, well-rounded education. And so that's what I always tell students initially as they're trying to decide, is this the right major for me? I've never ever thought about it. After I made that decision when I was 18 and talked to Dr. Surfley, and I was over in Dr. Scott's office 30 seconds later, I knew natural resources management forestry was where I was going to be going. But I guess I do say that to the students. It's got to be it's got to be an internal flame that takes you to your future, and you'll know it and you'll feel it if it's right for you. So that's what I say to a young student going into forestry and natural resources. You know, we got 102 million plus trees dying in the Sierra Nevadas. We just went through a major, 10-year drought that created the conditions that caused that forest decline. Those trees lost their vigor, bark beetles, some complex of disease agents, just a variety of factors have caused that major mortality to occur. And so now we got a whole central part of the Sierras affected by that insect problem and that mortality problem, and the future of forestry. My God, it's right there. We can't tolerate those kinds of things happening in California ever again. We've been active stewards of our forests, but we've got to become even more so. If climate change is real, and I believe it is real, in the context that global temperatures are warming and it is having its impacts in different ways in different parts of the country, we need to be responsive to that. And that's going to mean that we're going to think about how to promote the health of our trees and our forests through active management. I'm not saying we're going to go into national parks or wilderness areas to do this. We should try to allow natural processes to take their place there. But in managed working forests across California, we're going to have to step it up with reference to controlling the density and improving the forest health of those conditions. And that's going to take educated professional foresters making those decisions all across the state. And our forests vary, whether it be in the northern part of the state or the central part of the state or the southern part of the state or the Sierra Nevadas. Our coast redwoods are different from our oak woodlands, or oak woodlands are different from our Monterey pine stands. And so you have to have some appreciation for those differences as you make the right decisions. That requires education in forestry and natural resources to make that happen for the state of California. So when you ask me, is there a future in forestry and natural resources? Well, who else is going to manage these forests if they're not educated in forestry and natural resources? I smile when you ask me about SAF because I can remember some of the faculty that I had at the University of Nevada at Reno. A couple of them were really active SAF members. And they would say, Doug, you think about joining as a student member. So in my senior year in 1970, I believe it was, if you check my records in SAF, I think that's when I officially started. I think I was a student member of the student chapter there, but my official membership didn't really become so until 1970. And that's the year I graduated, too, from UNR. But I've been associated with SAF for, 46 years? Yeah, 46 years. And I've maintained that membership each year. I believe strongly in SAF. I knew that they were they were the association that set the standards for forestry education across the country. So doctors are part of the American Medical Association. Attorneys have their professional associations that they belong to. Engineers, the same. And these associations play various roles in helping set the standards for the professions that they're associated with. For us, at the national level, it's the Society of American Foresters. And I knew that as a senior at the University of Nevada, and I've always carried that knowledge with me as I've moved my career forward. I knew that if I wanted to be associated with forestry, there were two things I needed to do. One was affiliate with organizations that have forestry professionals associated with them, and to stay involved with work that was somehow associated with forestry that would lead me to other types of jobs and hopefully move my career forward in forestry. So SAF played a key role in helping me learn about forestry. It played a key role in helping me network with individuals to find out about job opportunities that I could try for as I worked my way forward, and it created lifelong friendships. And you asked me about leadership earlier. SAF, as you become more and more involved as a member, eventually you get asked to fulfill various roles for the association, working with others to move the association, the Society of American Foresters, forward in relationship to its mission, goals, and objectives. I've served as a chapter chair twice, I believe, for the High Sierra chapter and for the Los Padres chapter, and I served as state society chair for the Southern Society of American Foresters here in California, the SoCal, the Southern California Society, State Society, when we were two separate societies. I was state chair for that. They asked me to be a science advisor. I've had various roles, and each time I've learned a little something more about leadership and management, and wonderful working opportunities, work experience opportunities to get working with others. I think chapter chair I enjoyed being the state society chair, but I really enjoyed being chapter chair because we had wonderful chapter meetings. We had outside speakers. We met at really cool Basque restaurants. We had events for Thanksgiving and Christmas where we had Christmas trees for our members that we could. And various events like that brought a camaraderie amongst the members. And so I really liked my chapter affiliations. I think a more recent fulfilling experience has been working with Rick Standerford and Bill Snyder and many others to unite California forestry. We've gone through a One California Forestry effort to try to bring the two state societies together. Not try, we did, into one California Society of American Foresters. Now, there were various reasons why that was needed, but it was all up to the members to decide whether or not they wanted to do it, and the members said they did, and so now we're doing it. And I had a little bit of a role in that whole process, and so that's fulfilling to know that as you affiliate with association, the little bits that each of us do make a difference as we work forward in time. Oh, that's it. Relevance. Society of American Foresters. Well, first of all, I would say each member needs to stay relevant. And that's hard to do. Because relevance changes as society changes. Relevance changes as technology changes. Relevance changes in relationship to how the science moves forward. Relevance changes as major events like climate change affect our forests. And holy cats, that's hard to keep up with. One of the hardest challenges I had is just keeping up with the technology. To geographic information systems, to GPS, to all the laser technology, to computers. For crying out loud, I was using a slide rule in my chemistry class at the University of Nevada. Today, there's more power in this cell phone than in the largest computers that were on the university campus when I started out. I mean, it's just incredible how computer technology and so forth, and how do you maintain that relevance given those changes? And I tell my students that education and your bachelor's degree is only a beginning, and you need to be smart enough to keep yourself trained each year in various specific areas associated with the work that you're doing, whether it's software, whether it's hardware related to your computer, to GPS and GIS programs that are necessary for the forestry work and the forest land management work that you're doing, to the tools that we use to measure trees, to road location and the software associated with how we design and engineer our roads, to firefighting. Holy cats, relevance. You got to keep up with all of that. And SAF needs to do an even better job of helping its members stay current and relevant in relationship to these changes I've just laid out, and to inspire young people to develop for themselves training programs, yearly training programs that involve some of the courses that maybe SAF teaches or extension through universities, and get our young people to realize that SAF can be an organization that helps us remain relevant and doing good work with reference to our forests, given these changing conditions that we're faced with. One of the things I think we've done to sustain and to hopefully enhance that relevance is to perform one state society for the Society of American Foresters here in California. I, as you know, worked for the Forest Service for 10 years, and while I was working for the Forest Service, I was a member of the Northern California State Society, and that is a very active state society, and probably one of the best in the United States in terms of all the wonderful things that state society does, from the teacher education programs that they provide, the conservation programs for children, and school age children and associated with forestry and natural resources, to the programs that the chapters have and the state have. I loved it. And then I took my job at CalPoly, and that affiliated with me with the Southern State Society. Not nearly as active a state society. They had lots of good things going on. And when you get off the freeways in Southern California comes alive. There are so many wonderful things to see and to experience in Southern California. And that involves people as well. And I learned some things being a part of the Southern California Society of American Foresters, that I didn't learn when I was part of the Northern State Society. But I missed that activity that the Northern California Society had. And the other thing that was happening with reference to the Southern California State Society was we were a very small entity. And it was hard to stay fully active given the membership base that we had. And various members of the Southern State Society here in California felt that we needed to examine what we're all about and to think about how we can become more relevant and better focused at serving the needs of California, the citizens of California, and certainly SAF foresters and natural resource managers. So we approached Northern California members and said, we need to do something different here. And that was the beginning of this whole dialogue that took place between the two state societies to try to see if there was common ground. And from that, this whole motto of One California Forestry began to emerge, which is something I embrace completely, because in that unity, with the difficult problems that we are faced with here with reference to managing California's forests and wildland areas, it's going to require all of us putting our best foot forward, all of us working together, well-led, well-managed, to make the right decisions for the future of our forests. There's another aspect of it. You asked me earlier, or we discussed earlier, the relevance of SAF, and I did allude to the fact that I felt accreditation was important. I'll say it right now again. SAF accreditation of university programs and 2-year college programs is extremely important because it sets the professional standards for forestry and natural resources management across the country. I like the fact that SAF is looking at both accreditation of forestry programs and also natural resources management programs. I worry a little bit about, do we have enough resources to be able to do accreditation of those two types of programs across the country. But at the same time, I think it's a way to reach out to a much larger audience of people, to be more inclusive of people that are really interested in management of forestry and natural resources across the nation. So from that context, I think it's important for SAF to think about how it's going to develop financial resources and human power resources, human resources, to be able to do that job effectively and to set these standards. And I guess there's another part of me that's saying, remember, I got my undergraduate degree at the University of Nevada. I don't want any other student in any other university across the nation to feel like I felt. I got a bachelor's degree. I felt proud, but at the same time, I felt underserved by the university that I attended, which was the only one I could afford at the time. And you should never feel that way. A graduate focused on learning about forestry and natural resources should be encouraged, no matter where they occur, no matter where they live in terms of states or what university they went to, that there's a career for them in forestry and natural resources across the United States, if not the world, and that SAF is here for them to help them find that career path. So when you ask me, is accreditation important? It certainly is, but at the same time, we've got to be flexible enough to help young people, depending on their backgrounds, establish a successful career in various aspects of forestry and natural resources. Well, that depends. The ideal forest. In the middle of a wilderness area where natural processes are allowed to take place with scattered old-growth sugar pine and ponderosa pine and other associated species that are in that mixed conifer belt in some of our wonderful wildernesses. And natural processes can take their place while at the same time those forests are as unique as possible, and know that we can just stand back and let those natural processes take place. That would be an ideal forest. I can tell you what not an ideal forest is like. An overstocked forest with too many trees over too much of a landscape, where the risk of catastrophic fire and loss, stand replacing fire, are imminent. That's not what I would consider ideal. So if we move out of a wilderness area and we move into more of the agency-managed and private working forests of California, then I would say an ideal forest can be one that's either young in age or middle-aged or even older, but is healthy and is actively managed so that we keep up with that level of mortality that occurs in all forests all over California. But there's active stewardship taking place. I would suggest that an ideal forest is not one that's subdivided. That I would suggest that California needs to identify where it wants its forests and where it doesn't, and that it does a better job of managing that urban encroachment into these wildland areas to the extent that it can. We need to better define where we want our oak woodlands and where we don't, where we want to encourage agricultural development as contrasted to where we want to foster healthy oak woodlands. And that goes with reference to the other forest types that occur throughout California. In some cases, we've got some very difficult challenges. Pitch canker and its impact on our native stands of Monterey pine. The science is still not complete there with reference to what are the right approaches to manage native stands of Monterey pine. But common sense tells you that a Monterey pine stand that you can't even walk through is not a healthy forest, and is a forest that has a risk of stand replacement from fire. So I'm hopeful that an ideal forest in that kind of context will be one where the citizens decide that we need to do something about this and thin those forests to promote their health and to promote their structure and their development to the future. I suppose another aspect of that question of an ideal forest is where we understand the sylvics and the ecology of the forest to whatever management actions that we do undertake, that we're managing those forests sustainably, both spatially across that landscape and temporally through time. One of the worries that I have about the future is where are these financial resources going to come from to support education of young people in forestry and natural resources management. They continue to keep telling me that federal budgets and state budgets are declining, that there's less emphasis on the use of taxpayer dollars to support education, and yet at the same time, industry and agencies need trained professionals in various aspects of forestry and natural resources. So this is going to require financial resources from new sources. And I truly believe that our forest products industry and various industries associated with management of trees, the arboriculture industry, the tree care industry, and various even environmental agencies or environmental companies that are associated with various aspects of forest land management, and even real estate, private sector companies. We're going to have to reach out to these various sectors to see how we can develop more financial resources to enhance the quality of our forestry and natural resource programs across the country. You asked me earlier about my father and how he impacted my life, but I don't want to forget my mother. My mother was there during those difficult years. My dad was busy earning a living, working 2 jobs, and bless his heart, he did a great job of that, created the financial resources that enabled us to move to the future. But it was my mother that was home all the time, and she was the one that was faced with trying to help me get through those difficult health challenges that I had as a younger person, and helping me try to find some confidence to move forward through all that. She was from New York. She was the daughter of a New York police officer, and her grandmother, her mother and grandmother were citizens of the city of New York as well. And so I'm always thankful for my mother's sake, for all the role that my mother played in relationship to how she said, Doug, you're going to get yourself to the future by studying hard and understanding the importance of a good education. Boy, was she right on that. My dad said it, but my mother made sure that I did it. And my sister was there as well as I was growing up, and certainly I don't want to miss saying that my wife for the last 39 years has been a key part of my professional career and all that I've done. So family is extremely important. And I suppose there is something I should say about that. In that paper I wrote on leadership, I did say earlier that my father played a key role in helping me decide my future and helping me get to my future. But in this rush to get to your future, in this rush to become professionally competent, in this rush to achieve career development, you can be in such a rush that you lose track of family and the things that matter. Not that your professional life doesn't matter. I don't mean to say that. Your professional life does matter. It creates opportunity and financial resources that enable you to do more for your family. But I would suggest that some of us might get a little too occupied with that. And I would remind all the students and young people that are moving their career forward, remember, family must always come first, and that you should think about how you're going to make sure you prioritize enough time to attend to all the needs that you have for your family situation, and to not lose track of the importance of a solid family life. We were discussing, is there anything I'd like to add as I conclude this discussion with you? And I just there's no conclusion to life. In the sense that, yes, there's a beginning and an end to what we know here, and your faith and beliefs take us beyond our death to something that we all have to discover. But when people say they're retired, for me, I'm not saying I'm retired. I'm moving on, and I'm doing other things. I'm trying to find new adventures and new challenges. And I have the Piirto farm in northern Michigan. That was my grandparents' farm that my wife and I are now managing, and we built a log home on it. And we're trying to make sure that it is sustainably managed for the future, and that we set it up as a legacy for the family. And I also have my business called Crestline Forestry. Crestline Forestry, as you see here. And I'm involved with consulting work for the Forest Service and for private landowners. And I guess what I'd like to say to young people and people that are moving forward in life, you're not done. For your sake and for the sake of the people of your family and for the people around you, we all play a role no matter what our age as we take ourselves to the future.